Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next episode of our Let's Build of the Roger Williams Park Zoo. This episode, we are doing something that I've been trying to put off for a few weeks now, but I think I'd eventually, get around to it, and that's the Harbor Seal exhibit. So, the main reason you could probably notice why I might have been skipping it for a while is there are no seals in this game. In fact, there are no aquatic animals in this game. And so, because of that, making the actual seal mod was a lot more difficult than I thought. And unlike the eagle uh, episode that I did, I don't know, 2 episodes ago, that was a little bit easier just because I could do a prop. The seal I wanted to actually move around underwater and stuff, and for that I needed to be a little more clever. Luckily, I've finally come up with a solution. I did a lot of testing, and I think I've found a result that I'm pretty happy with. What you're seeing right now is me basically doing a quick texture time lapse. I didn't do the modeling process because I didn't think anyone would want to watch me model a pill. Basically, that's what a seal shape is. But I'm doing the texturing process right now. At Roger Williams Park Zoo, they have a harbor seal. So his name is Bubba. His buddy that he lived with for many years recently passed away last year or the year before. He had a cataract surgery in his eye. They had to take the whole eye out, and it was like a whole situation. And I don't think he lasted too much longer after that. But now we are actually getting into the habitat of the actual seal exhibit. And I know I've been saying this for the last few episodes, but this has actually been the most difficult exhibit I've had to do, or episode I've had to do, which is crazy because I thought after last week's polar bear fiasco with the tools and stuff, I was like, oh well, it can't be that bad. Boy, was I wrong, because not only did I have all the issues I had from last episode, the path system, the terrain system, the fence system, underwater viewing. But then I also had a modded animal, so that had its own challenges. So luckily, I don't think I'm gonna have this difficult of a time again for a bit. But man, was this just a painful experience. So I guess to kind of discuss what I'm doing right now. So basically, what I'm doing is the underwater viewing right now. This exhibit is still open to this day. It is right next to where the giraffe and elephants are currently. It's right next to the Textron building. And again, that little path that I have off to the side is where, back in the day, it used to connect up to the polar bear exhibit. So this little area, I guess you could call this the semi-aquatic mini area that used to exist at the zoo. Now it's just the harbor seals, but back in the day, it used to be the polar bears, harbor seals, and penguins all next to one another. The penguins got phased out maybe 7 years ago, and the polar bears have been about a solid 15 at this point. But yeah, the seals are still there to this day. Well, seal, I should say that. And this exhibit used to also have a single sea lion in it. So it used to have the two harbor seals as well as a sea lion. And right now, again, it's just Bubba, and he's on his own. So I guess I should discuss why this habitat was so difficult, at least first, before I go into the actual mod. So the habitat, the issue I had is aerial wise, the spacing is a little bit weird. So the actual exhibit shape is more of like an L-shaped tank, and so I had to try and fit it into this thing where when I first did the on top replica or trace map or whatever, it kind of drew the harbor seal as more of like a square shape, or like a circular shape, which isn't right. In real life, it's more of a L shape, so I had to kind of compensate. And so you see me messing with this whole path system for a bit because the path system is a little bit weird. So it goes up the hill from the Textron building, but then it loops around, and then it loops around back again. And it does a little overhang. So it's a little bit of a weird, funky shape, and I had to try and get it right. And you see me like basically redo it several times, probably like 3 or 4 times, and then you later see me do the tank itself maybe 7 or 8 times. Just it was so difficult to get right, just because again it's messing with a lot of different systems that don't like to play well with each other. So the water system, the tank system, the fence system, and the terrain system. And again, all of them don't like each other. So, you know, I can try and place down the tank, and then if I want to move the tank up, then it has an issue because the terrain and the paths are a mess. It's just not fun. So this is just me fighting with the terrain more than a nice, relaxing time lapse, unfortunately. I appreciate everyone, like, having, you know, patience when it comes to that stuff, because, yeah, I know it can be annoying, but, you know, again, I like to keep in my mistakes. I don't try to pretend like I'm a perfect Planet Zoo builder. But what I did want to discuss was, I guess, the actual mod process. So, as everyone knows, there are no harbor seals or, you know, aquatic animals in the game currently, other than the, you know, the crocodilians like the gharial and the saltwater croc, and then you could argue the hippos and polar bears, but none that are really a truly aquatic animal. We don't have otters, we don't have penguins, we don't have sea lions and seals and dolphins and, you know, fish and that sort of thing. And so I had to get kind of creative with how I was going to manage the seal mod. So the solution I knew I would come up with was I needed an animal that could swim. So very early into my testing process, I started testing the seal probably around episode 4 or 5 of this series. Just because I knew it was coming up, you know, even though I had, like, all the, like, you know, the red river hog and the giraffe and the elephant and stuff, I knew at some point I would have to do the seal. And so I was thinking ahead, and I'm like, okay, what are some options I could do? So the option that I was thinking of doing is the water wheel East Asia item is animated, and I could have attached a seal prop to that, and it would have just spun around. And I would have made the wheel itself invisible, and so the seal would have just kind of moved around on a track in a circle, and that could work. And I think it could work for stuff like fish or flying birds and stuff, but I didn't think it was ideal for like a seal. So the second alternative I had in my initial testing was using a tiger. So I said, okay, well, tigers swim, that's a thing. So if I take the tiger, I can probably make it, you know, look like a seal enough. Seals kind of look like a cat or a dog anyway. And then it'll swim. And my initial test did work. It could swim, and it vaguely looked like a seal, but not really. Because the way it would paddle and stuff, it just looked like a drowning cat more than a seal. So I went back to the drawing board, kind of put it off to the side for a bit, you know. It's why I started that North American section. I was like, oh yeah, just forget about the seal, you know, I don't have to do it. Okay, we can just move on and just worry about North American animals, which aren't really a big deal because the game has all of them. But I knew I eventually would have to come around to doing it. Before I mention this, I just want to mention an issue I'm having right now. So I'm trying to, like, change the fence type to the left that's currently glass. I wanted to change it to be brick, or concrete. It wasn't working, so I eventually, even though you can see me lowering it and stuff right now, I actually have to tear this entire thing down and rebuild it just because it was messing up. But back to my story. So when it came to the seal, I was like, I need a new candidate other than the big cat. So I did a test run, and it was funny because I had all of my past co-hosts. I had Minty, Dalton, Croco, everyone I've had like in a call, and we were all like watching these tests. And so I took all the aquatic animals. I had wolves, wild dogs, tigers, bears, crocodiles, hippos. I had all of the swimmable animals in the like in a race, basically, just to look at their animations. So Minty who you might remember from the Falcon episode, or the Eagle episode, I should say. He recommended the Formosan black bear because the bears are the only animal that actually can pause in water. So all the other animals can tread water. They can like swim around, but the bear can actually like kind of stand upright and kind of like idle in water. And I thought, yeah, that actually is ideal. So I looked at the animations of the bear. Everything looked solid. The swim animation when it's swimming looks similar to a tiger or something. It actually looks a little bit better because it doesn't look like it's drowning, and it doesn't look like a doggy paddle like it would for like the wild dogs or the wolves or anything. So it looked better there in that perspective, and it could also, yeah, hang out in water. So obviously I know that like everything works fine because I just did the polar bear episode. So I took his advice and I used the Formosan black bear, and I basically, chopped off its legs in the least morbid way possible. Chopped off its legs, changed its face, did some serious reconstructive surgery, and then I got that kind of tube shape that you saw at the very beginning that I was texturing. And basically the assumption was that, provided I weighted everything correctly, which I did, I could basically get this pill shape to swim in water where it wouldn't look like it's actually, kicking or anything. But instead, the back legs could kind of be used as a paddle, and it would instead make the back fins look like they're actual, or the flippers look like they're moving back and forth like a rudder. And then I could take a second object and make the front flippers, which I could just kind of wait to be part of the belly and just stick them onto the side. And I think the result in the end worked out very well. And I'm glad I got to, pull it off, and I think I did a good job, and I can't wait for you guys to see the result at the very end of the video. So I guess back to the build, now that I've kind of got what I would assume is like kind of the majority of the difficult part of the episode done, which was like just getting that initial water tank in the exhibit. I have a little bit of issues right now. I'm just kind of cleaning up the tank a little bit, but for the most part, it's this is the final situation, because around this time is when I actually fix the elevated path. So the elevated path normally in the zoo is, I'd say about 10 to 15 feet above where the seals can, or the seal, I keep saying seals, poor guy is alone now, could sit. So you see me like raising the terrain and stuff to approximately that right level, just because, again, the terrain is like a weird thing, because even though I had an accurate layout of the map, the terrain was always like up in the air, just because I had to kind of eyeball it in that regard. And this is where I start the next issue, which is elevated terrain paths, and I'm trying to flatten it, and etc., etc. But I eventually get it. I think this is like pretty much where I ended up. And then I just kind of, cover up this like rocky area, and everything looks fine. I'm not going to worry about this half of the zoo for a bit, because like I said, I want to start that Asia section before I go into the kind of, I guess, mundane part of the zoo. Like, I want to get to the South America building that's new, but like I really could care less about like the farmyard and some of the staff facility buildings and stuff. I have no interest in that immediately. When I could be doing stuff like the moon bears, or the actual Formosan black bears, or the snow leopards, or, that sort of thing. But you see me right now, I'm basically just like kind of, I had to modify one of the other staff paths that I had from the Elephant House episode. I had to kind of move that a little bit, and I readjusted. So now that's a little inaccurate, but again, this all comes down to when I first made On Top Replica, like the sizing isn't 1-to-1, and so that was just a minor issue. But what I'm doing right now is I'm actually doing the kind of I guess, sunbathing area, or like, they also use it for, you can feed Bubba, you can feed the seal, for like, I forget how much the price is now. Give me a sec, I can probably look it up really quick. But I think it's like anywhere from, give me a sec, plan your visit. Oh, I should mention that now with coronavirus, that would probably affect it. But normally, if we look at the animal encounters, the seal encounter is $25 a participant, or $20 for a zoo member. But again, unfortunately, since it's 2020, they're canceled for the season. But normally, you would come out onto this area and you'd be able to feed Bubba for $25. You can, he just eats fish and whatever. And basically, this is also just like a little area where he can sunbathe and kind of chill when he's not swimming around. But 99% of the time, you're going to find him just swimming around in a circuit. There's 2 large rocks in his pool, and he basically has a little circuit. He'll go by the underwater viewing, look down, go around one of the rocks, and do kind of a figure 8 around the other. And then he basically just does that circuit all day. And while I would normally say that for most animals, circuits are bad when it comes to, because that's like stress pacing, I think seals, it's just a case of, you know, they're constantly swimming, so it would make sense that when they don't have a ton of space to swim in, they would just naturally kind of do a circuit. And I should also probably take this time to mention that Bubba and the harbor seals are another animal that the zoo is trying to phase out, unfortunately. I'm less upset about this because Bubba is kind of getting up there, and like I said, like his buddy that he lived with for many years just passed away. The sea lion that they lived with died maybe 10 years ago, so they're kind of old at this point, like, and this exhibit isn't ideal for either a sea lion or a seal. And so the plan was we would be getting California sea lions returning to the zoo with penguins at the cost of the zebra and Watusi exhibit. So I'm kind of upset about that. I want to keep the zebras, but I do like penguins. I do like sea lions. So that's kind of the toss-up. So we should be getting those back at some point, but for now, the zoo's plan is just kind of let Bubba live out his life as, you know, doing what seals do, which is basically just swimming around. I think what they said is what they would do is they would convert his current exhibit, so this kind of tank area, into a bighorn sheep exhibit, which is kind of an interesting choice in my opinion, because I'm not sure if that's before or after they would phase out the Audads, because it's kind of a similar niche, you know, like a, you know, literal mountain goat type situation, but I mean, to each his own. What I'm working on right now is actually what I kind of liked about this entire area. It's what I respect about the zoo overall. Even though a lot of the exhibits for the ungulates, like the bison and the zebras and stuff, are just grass fields, they did have a sort of interesting kind of brutalist concrete aesthetic throughout a lot of the other exhibits that kind of was a motif. And these large rock, like, cliff areas and stuff, made out of cement, of course, wrapped around, like, multiple exhibits. So the rock piece that I was just making and the rocks that I'm surrounding the wall with right now, normally would, like, basically wrap around the whole harbor seal exhibit, wrap around the penguin exhibit, and then loop around to where the polar bear exhibit is. And then going even further, the polar bear rocks also phase into the Asia section, the Marco Polo Trail, which then led into the snow leopard exhibit, which led into the moon bear exhibit. So this giant, like, rock formation basically wrapped around the whole zoo, and I think and it still wraps around technically. It's just really cool, and even though obviously, like, you know, concrete and stuff is kind of outdated, it had a really cool aesthetic to it, and, like, I sort of appreciate that element of the zoo, even if it's, again, not totally, you know, okay anymore by modern zoo standards for, like, a polar bear exhibit or a seal exhibit, etc. But it definitely has an interesting art style to it, if that makes any sense. So what I'm now doing in a minute is I'm just raising the rock wall, because the rock wall literally wraps around the whole exhibit all the way up to the little viewing platform. And then what I wanted to do here is there's a small staircase for staff use. I've never seen it used in 20 plus years. It's really, like, you can tell it was built with the exhibit in mind, but they haven't used it since. Like, because the entire thing is, it's a concrete staircase built into the rock formation. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm basically making the kind of railing, and I just tilt it on its side. But it has a really cool aesthetic to it, and I really like it. It's one of those things, like, you can blink if you miss it. The area right next to it is actually home to some groundhogs, wild groundhogs. They have a little sign normally that says, like, keep out, groundhogs are harmless, but they're wild, so don't disturb their, like, hole. And it's right next to this area. And I think back in the day, this used to be for just raising and lowering the awning that drapes over the Harbor Seal exhibit when it gets, like, super hot, like, just to give it some shade. And I use basically some flat concrete, I keep saying concrete even though it's tundra rock, or actually it's temperate rock in this case. But basically just wrap around and just I kind of cover it up and make it a little more organic, so it looks less like I'm just plopping down a bunch of individual rocks and make it look more like a flat, flat thing. I think that's a thing that sort of bothers me about some creators when it comes to Planet Zoo is, unfortunately, the shape of some of the rocks makes cliffs look, building them off of the individual bricks kind of look like you're building it out of blocks. So I like to try and, like, cover it up as best I can to make it look like they're, like, one uniform piece of rock instead of, like, a bunch of, like, oh yeah, I can clearly see where you made the bumps. And that's why I use, like, a lot of the flat pieces instead of the round ones, other than just kind of, in art terms, like a clay build-up. Basically just like a foundation. So what I'm doing right now is I'm placing down the kind of pole. I eventually change it. I use this, like, temporary, like, Asia pole or whatever for now, but I eventually change it. And that would be where, again, they have the awning that goes over the Harbor Seal exhibit. I haven't seen it draped over the entire exhibit in many years. They normally just have kind of a half awning over by the sunbathing area, which probably makes sense. Like, if they want sun, they can always go out on one of the rocks, but if they want shade, they can, no need to, like, cover the entire exhibit anymore. You can just have just that little sunbathe area. And speaking of rocks, I start actually working on the two major rock formations that are in the actual pool. So, from my experience, Bubba seems to enjoy the rock formation that I'm building currently more. That's his kind of sunbathing rock. And again, as you can see, he basically does a figure 8 around those and then looping around to where the underwater viewing area is. So if you could just imagine a figure 8, that's basically what he does constantly. And then past that, I'm just kind of, like, placing some foliage and stuff around the surrounding area. Nothing super sophisticated. Basically just, like, a little bit of extra detail, just so that, like, it doesn't look super gross. I think around this time I actually had to go and use mulch. So because the terrain system around this area was, like, a mess, and I had to use elevated paths for the actual, like, pathing system, I used those mulch pieces that I haven't used probably since the beginning of the series, to basically just kind of fake terrain. That way I could just place down some foliage and it looks like it's actual terrain and not what it is, which is, like, just a mess. In truth, the best way to put it. So you can see me now. I'm swapping out that electrician pole for, like, a custom pole. I make it out of primitives. It's just, like, literally, like, the primitive cylinder, and then I dye it gray. So nothing sophisticated, but basically there's just two of them on either side. So there's one here and then one on the path, and then there's another two on the sunbathing area. So you can see me placing them down. I had to check Google Earth in a minute or so, just because I wanted to make sure that I had the placement of everything right. So you can see me like adjusting, and then yep, there. That little pause is when I basically was checking Google Earth, and so I was just making sure everything's okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm making a small little bridge to connect the sunbathing deck, I guess you could call it, like the main piece of land, to the rock, and I just make it out of the new dyeable bamboo pieces. I think they actually work kind of well for like almost like a temporary, mat type, material. I don't know what you would call it. And what I'm doing right now is I'm making the area where this is actually a pull-out fence that they use for the seal feedings. So the guests, when they do it, they would pull out this fence. It's a little like chain fence with like wood, so it's not like super protective or anything, but it's a seal. It's not really gonna hurt you to begin with. And they would normally pull that out so that when you want to place it, you can feed them. And what I'm also doing is I'm kind of placing down some toys, both practical toys and non-practical toys. So that little blue thing that I just placed down, I only use a primitive. It's basically a little pull toy that Bubba uses to like roll around on. It's almost like one of those like elementary school scooters, and it basically acts as like a little bed for him, and so he chills on that. And then obviously, what seal exhibit would be incomplete without a blue ball, so I had to throw that in. And so obviously the seals at the zoo have one of those. And then past that, we're almost coming to a close with this episode. And I'm just readjusting the poles one last time, adding a second set of poles to the other side of the cliffs. And then I'm doing the final kind of tapestry that drapes over this entire section. I'm using a technique similar to what I did in the African elephant tapestry. This one is a little bit more flat, so it's just a big square. I didn't have to like do that kind of dipping motion, and I just used some of those African cloths to kind of just copy it and paste a few rows, and then there we go. So basically that's really the episode in a nutshell. And so I really hope you guys like the build, and I really hope you guys like the harbor seal mod I made. I will be uploading this to the workshop. Now I will mention it will float on land, so get it in water as fast as possible, because on land it will float, but in the water it looks great. So thanks for watching, and in a second you'll see the exhibit, or the seals I made. So enjoy. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.